Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1469. We finished the paragraph. The second parenthesis that the Rebbe Rashab adds as he is developing and exciting the language of the Mittler Rebbe in the Maimer, the Chanukah Maimer that we've been discussing. Mika Hashem Elokeinu Amashpili. That was quoted first, starting from the Alter Rebbe's source Maimer, which is on page 1352. Amakbil Lisheves, I'm sorry. Amakbil Lisheves, Amashpili Lira Shemayim Ba'aretz, B'Shemayim Ba'aretz. Yeah. So, in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, what was quoted before in the bottom of page 1468 and top of 1469 was the discussion about the impact of body and soul on each other. Is there an impact or there's no impact? On one hand, the soul is like the sun. It gives off energy, but is not affected in turn. The fact that there's an injury in the body, he said, like, for example, God forbid, somebody, a blind person can give birth to a seeing eye child. And yet, there's the other side, we say that the experiences of the body do impact, the pleasure and pain of the body do impact the soul. And also the other way around. The soul's joy and the soul's distress will also have an effect on the body. So the answer, the explanation is there's two levels. There's when the soul is more engaged. That's when there is an impact. And when the soul is on a higher level, more what you call etzem haruchnis of the neshama, not the ruchnis shebegashmi, gashmi sheberuchnis, and ruchnis shebegashmis, then there's either low impact or less impact. The parentheses, just to sum up, the first parentheses, he gave it yesh lekarav zeis. Gave the example when he gave the scenario when a person is very preoccupied with something, let's say with their mind, they won't feel the pain of something. Also spoke about das, how das is the bridge that causes the impact of intellect on emotion, that the emotion should be affected by it, the idea of hispilus. And the second parenthesis, which we learned yesterday, to sum up, here he talked more about the ruchnius of it. Going back to the initial, it's not just about the biological effect that they have on each other on a biological level, on a physical level, if you wish, but also the avodah of it. What's the avodah? The avodah ruchnius of the nefesh alekis and nefesh abamis of the soul on the body. So he said, briefly summing up, that what the part of the neshama that engages with and imsheches achar aguf, that so-called follows and is drawn after the body, that's only the lower level of the neshama, like Likutei Torah says, that's only the lower level, which is called gasas haruach, that is mulubeshes ma'od, that's very much manifest and therefore much more engaged with the body. Elsewhere, it says nefesh kisechta. When you say nefesh kisechta, you're talking about the neshamas of Biy'a, not the neshamas of Atzilus within Biy'a, and definitely not neshamas of Atzilus itself, because they are higher than Chet. So you see from that the very soul within us, there's different levels. There's the soul that engages more, and there's the soul, parts of the soul that remain somewhat removed from human experiences. That's the point. Then he went and he brought the Geras HaKedesh that Madregas Atzilus is mistalkes be'es hachet. During the Chet, the levels of Atzilus are mistalkes because they are not engaging in anything that's negative. At most they can do is like disappear, so to speak, or not be involved. Okay. But then comes another part. That's the very interaction between body and soul as far as goes the lower levels of the soul enter into the body. But what about the part that we learned, which is the refinement of the animal soul? Remember, the whole purpose of all of this was not to avoid. The neshama comes down to the body in order to transform it. So the body is engaging in the challenges of this world, the material world. Nefesh habamis, when we understand that a level of neshama, a higher level of neshama will not be engaged with that, will be removed from it, as we spoke about it. It's like the idea of being preoccupied with higher levels, and it's not involved in that, it's not engaged. But there's also the transformation of the body and the animal soul. So that's where he says, Omnam, in order to transform the animal soul, there, even the higher levels of neshama are also involved. They are also necessary to help the transformation. So even though you could say, Ima yeshi yesh lemer, you could say that maybe that's not the case. That's only the lower levels of the neshama that engage with the animal soul. The higher levels, like we just discussed, are in a higher level. They live in, they live in the world of Atzilus. They live in the world of Elikus. And the lower levels of the neshama are involved in the day-to-day grind of life. So you could hypothetically say that that is the domain of the lower levels of the neshama, or like he says, the neshamas of Biy'a, which their role is to come down below and work through the hard work and exertion from the bottom up by manifesting within the body and the animal soul and creating a biy'a mat l'mayla. But higher neshamas are mamayla l'mata. They're not involved because they're like Evdi Hashem ben Nishmasam. They work from the top down. So he's really saying two things here. You could hypothetically say that the lower levels of the neshama engage and the higher levels of your own neshama are somewhat removed. And the same thing in general. Which neshamas primarily work from the bottom up? It's the neshamas of Biy'a, but higher neshamas work from the top down. So you speak about it both in general neshamas and also in each neshama itself. This is hypothetically the case. And he gave the example of Shabbos and Chayil. Chayil is when we engage. Shabbos is when we're more removed. So you could say that, he says, Avol, but that's not the case. That's not the case. Because also the neshamas of Atzilus, which means also the higher levels of soul, they're also involved in doing the birur and tikkun. They're also involved. They're not only living in the domain of kedusha. They're also involved, and because they also came down below. Remember, it's not just the neshama, the part of nefesh that comes down below. Also ruach and neshama and chay yechida, everything came down into the body. They're not engaged as much, but they all came down into the world. So they melebeshes beguf shebechinas aran shebeneshama. The only difference is that the way the levels of soul that engage with the body and animal soul, there it's mamata l'mayla. That's indeed true. And the higher levels of the neshama, or the higher neshamas, they engage through mamayla l'mata. Basically more like shining their light to help transform and cause the nefesh habamis to have a haftas Hashem lekecha b'chol avavcha b'shnei yitzurech. And to give an example of a higher level of neshama, he spoke mazlayu chazi. That's like the mazel. That's not something that we consciously experience. In other words, in our avodah, let's say in our avodah of the month of El, there's our active conscious work that we're looking at and being accountable and reviewing our lives and seeing what we can do better. That's something that is the level of nefesh and the lower levels of the soul that we can relate to. That doesn't mean, however, there aren't higher levels of the soul that are also affecting us, but they affect us from a form of makif, like he said. The helam and makif. We don't really see where it's coming from. It's more like from a mila, you have an awakening. One moment you have an epiphany or you have some type of feeling, not due to your effort, directly due to your effort. So you see that also impacts us, and that could also cause us to do tshuva. So though it remains makif and so on, u'makol mokim his galus on the shah b'chinas avara b'poil ba'guf v'nefesh habam b'chinas hishapcha sheichel neheva. The bottom line is, nevertheless, even though they may be higher levels, when that's revealed, that does affect the animals, the guf v'nefesh habamis, to the point that it can transform it, like we learned earlier, that to actually transform the animal soul, you need higher level of ava rabba. He said that explicitly back on page 1460. On 1460. So what you see here is that there are different ways, there are different levels of how we engage with the animal soul. And I was just teaching chapter 14, Tanya, and something similar very parallels this idea. And I'll just share it because it may help understand this. So on one hand, we're told, we shouldn't be a Rosh, you should be a Beinani. And that's something everybody has the capacity to be through avodah. Through our hard work, we can achieve self-mastery, self-control, but only over our thought, speech, and action. You cannot eliminate the animal soul. You can control it. You can keep it at bay. You cannot allow it to affect your thought, speech, and action. But then there's also the first half of the oath, to be a tzaddik. Now, not all, we can't become a tzaddik. A tzaddik is created. That's specific souls that are a tzaddik. And yet, he says, you can make an effort to be, you have to make an effort to be a tzaddik. Not to be an actual tzaddik, but to aspire to also despise everything that's opposite, that's antithetical to godliness. And that actually has an impact on you because it can change your personality. And then he says, then there's something that can happen from above. That when through your work, it's possible that God will respond with an asrusa delayla and send the neshama be'ibur in a form of impregnate within you the level of a tzaddik. But that's not through your effort. What do you see from that? That there are things that we consciously can work on. Everybody has the capacity for certain things that you can expect from them. Self-control. You don't have to act on every temptation you have. But to eliminate a temptation completely, that's not something in our capacity. We were created with an animal soul. We will have temptations. We make an effort, and then Hashem from above can have an effect. My point is that there's different ways that we work on ourselves. There's the things we directly can achieve and generate. There are things that are not directly achievable, but the higher levels of the soul will have an impact on us. I'm not saying it's exactly the same idea, because there it's coming from Hashem, from above. But my point is that whether it's Mamata Lamaila is more when we engage and we do it through our effort, Mamaila Lamata is more like the Neshama's power when you contemplate on Hashem Echad, like we learned. So Nefesh Elikis itself can have an impact and spill over into the Nefesh Abamis. So that's more the deep passion and love of the Nefesh Elikis affecting the Nefesh Abamis. When you work Mamata Lamaila, it's more like working with the Nefesh Abamis, explaining to it, understanding it, which is a lot of what we're learning right now. How does the Nefesh Abamis itself going to come to understand and appreciate to have V'hafta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. So you may recall we learned that Shema has Mamayla Lamata, Mamat Lamayla. Mamayla Lamata is more when you think about the divine unity and you draw down and it causes a passion in the divine soul, which in turn also affects the animal soul, like we learned. Then there's how the animal soul understands it and appreciates it. And that's more of a Mamata Lamayla type of Avodah. That's more or less summing up what we learned in the parentheses and the context of it. Okay. So with that, let's continue the next paragraph. Unless someone has any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions on what we've learned. Because he's now going to go back to the language of the Mittler Rebbe, where he stopped, which continues from the top of the page, 1469. This is all the Mittler Rebbe's language. Any questions? Okay.
When you're trying to work with the Manifest Bahamas to transform it in the base medrash, are you engaging the highest levels, or what levels are you engaging in?
What do you
learning?
mean base medrash? You're referring to that when that you should schlep the Nefesh Abamis to the base medrash if it's
exactly right, the Kedushin, where
so you're bringing a subject that he does not address here, right? So that's, I immediately jump when I hear that, because you're asking me about something that's not discussed here directly. Since it's not discussed, I don't know what level that is. How would I know?
Learning Torah in general is, could I ask that one? Learning Torah in general, is that which part of the neshama is that engaging? The highest levels, Atzilus of a neshama, or is that?
I'm assuming it depends how you learn. You can learn Torah on all levels. I don't know if there's a specific level. It depends how you learn Torah. I mean, you're talking about Torah. What's the contrast? Torah as opposed to what? Davening? Tshuva?
Or mitzvahs, doing mitzvahs with somebody.
Okay, so he didn't get back. So near mitzvah Torah, which is part of this whole mimer, he asked questions about it, but he didn't explain it yet. And unfortunately, the Rebbe Rashab in this Hemshech is never going to get back to it. At least the Mashiach comes. So we're going to have to go back to the Mittler Rebbe's mimer and the Alter Rebbe's mimer to understand the role of Torah and mitzvahs in this context. It is discussed in this Maimer. Remember, the example of the candle, Ner, is not just for the neshama, it's also an example of Ner mitzvah and Torah So mitzvahs and Torah are very much part of this discussion, but I would wait for that until we get there. Because right now, he's speaking primarily Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, the neshama, that part, how the neshama is, Nefesh Elikis is affecting the Nefesh Abamis, the neshama part. And the Torah mitzvah part we will get to. And as I've discussed a number of times, there's tefillah also. There's davening. Part of this is davening, shema. So a big part of the themes of Mamay Lamata Matlamayla is Mamay Lamata is usually Torah. Mamata Lamayla is usually tefillah. That is said explicitly on page 1350. I don't know if you're referring to that or you're just asking it in general. But when you want to go there, it is an intricate part of this whole discussion. I just would wait with that because it'll just be confusing at this point.
Okay.
What the role of each of them are.
And as you said, in page 1350, it says tefillah is lamata lamayla. What is mitzvah again? Did he say that, or he never said this? You just said.
I discussed it briefly a few times, but I'd rather not say anything conclusive until we learn it all inside. Because it's not so simple. It's a little complicated. Mitzvah can be seen, Mamata Lamayla could be seen as Mamay Lamata. Torah for sure is Mamay Lamata, but there's also Mamata Lamayla within Torah. I mean, I don't know if you're here all the class. I've discussed this a number of times because these are central themes of Ayin Beis. They're not just footnotes. So they all have a particular role. I mean, they all interact with each other. Overall, Ayin Beis, the 550 pages till 1350, was primarily focused on Mamata Lamayla. From 1350 and on, it's Mamay Lamata. But in the process, we also now introduced Neshama, and we've also introduced Mitzvah. So we have 4 pieces here. We have a Neshama, we have Torah, we have Tefillah, Torah, and Mitzvah. If you want, you could also add Shuvah into the equation if you like. So all of them are part of the puzzle, and generally speaking, it's a process of an interface that goes both from the bottom up and from the top down, but there are different parts of the puzzle that need to be spelled out, and that I would like to reserve as we continue on, and we'll do it in a methodical way, because the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe discuss it very directly. Said the Rebbe Rashab discusses it, but he never finishes it. So that's how I would prefer really addressing it.
Thank you.
What is relevant here is that the 2 types of avodah, matlamayla, is like the neshamas as they engage below is more matlamayla. Like you said, Evdi Hashem begufam, neshamas of Biy'a, the lower levels of souls, and the higher levels of souls, or the higher level within a soul, is mamayla mata through the avarabba of the nefesh elikis, like he says, chinas mamayla lamata. That is what is mentioned explicitly here. So it's definitely going to help understand the general context of things. Okay. Good. Yeah. So continuing on the new paragraph, V'adugma mikol zeh yuvon, and all of this will serve as an example to understand the neshama haklolis. Now, why is it a dugma? Because remember, it all started with the idea whether God, Ani Hashem Leishanisi, that godliness is not affected by this world, by existence. Yesh miyesh is affected. So that's where we began to discuss the bottom of page 1467, that said, that you can't say that it has an impact when it talks about creator and creation. And meanwhile, in the discussion, we've already now discussed the light of the sun, but now we've gotten to the whole nefesh and the guf, body and soul. So he's now going to bring it back to the central theme. And that is, b'neshama haklolis, shu Malchus the Atzilus, the Elamus. The general soul is referring to Malchus of Atzilus as it manifests in the Elamus. This language is straight from the Mittler Rebbe, and it's not so clear to me what it even means, to be honest. Neshama klolis, what does that mean? Is he referring to the general soul and not the levels we just discussed? So he's just going back. I think that's what it sounds like to me. But this is classic Mittler Rebbe, where sometimes he says a term, and it's not very clear, at least initially, what level he's talking about. But he just says these words: Neshama klolis, shehu Malchus Atzilus be'elamis. So most likely the meaning of it is the general soul, which is referring to the level of Malchus of Atzilus. So we're not going into whether it's Neshamas of Biy'a or Neshamas of Atzilus. We're talking about the general Neshama is the level of Malchus of Atzilus, be'elamis, as it manifests in the worlds, and that is called Shenikra or Shenikras Elikim Chayim. That level is called Elikim Chayim, meaning Elikim as it manifests in life, the light living God. Begile er v'chayis b'teich kol almin. That's referring to the revealed light and vitality, b'teich kol, not save of kalam. In contrast, b'bchinas koach hapel b'nifel. So now we starting to emerge what he's talking about. The level where God invests himself, the koach hapel b'nifel. If you go back to the end of the paragraph on page 1468, and I need to refer to that or else it's going to be very confusing. Before he got into the whole discussion whether a body and a soul impact each other, what did he say? He said that Ein Sof, that even the ha'ara of Elikus, even Eira Liki does not experience a shinui, an impact, a change. And then look at the last three lines on the paragraph on 1468, middle paragraph. And that which comes bislapshus, because there is a part of the divine that does manifest within. Like we spoke about the nefesh. There's a part of the nefesh that does engage with the body and is impacted by it. So that seems to, yes, have impact. So how do you reconcile it? So he says that's rak ha'ar the ha'ara. That's not a reflection, it's a reflection of a reflection. V'gam bezeh, and even in that level, ain't shinim mitzad the etzem. There's no shinim mitzad the core source. Ki mitzad the islapshus. There's only a shinim mitzad the islapshus. So the nefesh, using the example of the soul, when it feels the body's pain or the body's pleasure, it's only a reflection of a reflection, so to speak, of the soul, not the etzem ruchnius of the neshama. And even then, it's not the neshama itself that's experienced. It's not mitzad the etzem. It's mitzad the hislapshus, because the neshama is engaging. So it's like if you get involved with somebody who you love very dearly and they're experiencing pain, you're also going to experience pain. But that doesn't mean that you fundamentally would have experienced that pain. It's only due to your empathy and due to your connection to what you're engaging with that's causing you to have that. So he's saying the same thing. So that's the koach hapel b'nifel. That's very important here, because what he's going to be discussing is that the divine, we also have these three levels, if you wish, but two levels in general. One is Elikus, that leishanisi, and Avaya leishanisi, even the oir, that doesn't have any impact. That's like the nefesh, the neshama that's beyond, that's so-called very preoccupied or beyond being impacted. But then there's the part of the nefesh that does impact it. So there's also a Elikus that manifests koach hapel b'nifel, where there is going to be an impact. But that's in Malchus of Atzilus, as we will learn, as we have learned, and I'll explain as we go along here. That's what he's bringing this back now. So everything we've learned here, he's now bringing it back to understand it as kind of context of godliness and relationship between God and existence. Because just to bring it back to the bigger picture, remember, if we want a full interface between God and existence, you want both elements. You want God that's beyond change, but you also want a God that interacts with us and relates to us, or else there's no full interface. It would be like saying you have the divine is very pure, but it never really engages with us. So it's important to understand that there's a level of godliness, mamala kalaman, and mamala kalaman itself, levels that engage with us to the point that God experiences what we experience. How does that reconcile with the divine that's beyond? Because there's two different levels. And there's both are there, both exist. And this is going to bring us back to a theme that we learned a while back, which back on page 1429, but I'll refer to that soon when we get there. Okay. Shemezeh muchrach. This compels us to say the fact that it's a koach hapel benifel, that actually, I want to correct myself. Neshama klolis mebchinas malchus atzil b'chinas malchus atzil be'elmis is not talking about the human soul. He's not talking about the soul within us. He's talking about the general soul that gives life to existence. That's correct. Now I'm reading it, I see now. So that's the dogma. Till now, we were talking about the example of a soul that enters into a body and all the different levels that are there, like we discussed. Now he says the dogma of all of that is the neshama haklolis, meaning the general life force, the general neshama of Olamus. So just like there's a neshama, like we said, kashem neshama mamala saguf, just like a soul fills a body, Kadosh Baruch Hu mamala sa'elamus. God fills existence. So godliness is the soul of all of existence. That's what he meant by neshama klolis. I said before that it may mean neshama klolis that's not connected to the levels of the soul. He's not talking about that. That's neshama klolis. Malchus Atzilus is the general. That's not Zav Atzilus. It's not Chacham Bina Atzilus. Malchus, which engages and becomes Elikim Chayim. That's Elikim Chayim. Begila Erva Chayim b'teich kol elemis or b'teich kol alman. Koach hapel benifel. So Malchus Atzilus now is like the level of the nefesh that engages with existence. Shemezeh muchrach, the fact that it's a koach hapel benifel, it's not shining from above like sunlight or like the levels of the soul that are higher than the body. It's manifesting koach hapel benifel. Just like when we throw a stone, we actually hold the stone and we're investing our energy and throwing the stone. Hashem Kavyachol, so to speak, also engages with existence like that. That compels us to say there must be some change in his pilus because he's manifesting within it. He's not removed from it. So I know you'll say, 1 second, didn't we learn Ani Hashem Leishanisi? Okay, that's the level that's higher. That's Havaya, that's higher than Malchus of Atzilus. But Malchus does have that effect. Ukamesha Kosev, Machtuli Chosed Aleph. Shu Kamachet Bebosed Achai. Okay, I have to look up what that means. Machtuli Chosed Aleph. Shu Kamachet Bebosed Achai. Okay, I'll just go with my memory if I recall correctly. Or if someone can look it up, maybe quickly. Maybe we'll find something. Let's see. I don't want to misspeak here. I remember the concept, but I remember now the details. Yeah.
I looked it up yesterday, but I don't remember what it means.
Okay.
I'll try and find it again.
No, I have it already. I found it. I just no, the simple pshat I know. Just 1 second. So machtali is actually supposed to come from the word from chet, like mem. It should have written mem ches tes aleph, like mechateli, but it's missing an aleph. So even though, yeah, shu kamachat bebosar achai. Just a second.
It says in the Gemara, says the two Rebbeim are debating something, whether when the flesh feels pain, does the soul has the impact on the soul? Amar le'idach v'la yadav Vaksiv ach besaro alav yichal v'nafsho alav teval amar Rabbi Yitzchak kasha rima lemeis kimachad bebasar hachai. One said to the
You mind
to the
posting
other,
this so I can see it inside?
yeah, sure. You want me to post it with what above it, or just that one thing I read?
Whatever you have.
Okay. Okay, I posted it.
Yeah, I may need to okay, I'm looking. Yes, if I recall correctly, it's a Zohar. It's all based on a Zohar.
The Zohar seems to be drawing from the Gemara. At least
Okay.
seems that way to me.
Okay, I will look this up and come back to you with what this means in detail, but I will tell you what I do know. I just don't remember the details of this actual text. Basically, the point is that from the Zohar and from other places, we derive that when there's a chet, there's a chet. When a person sins, so it has an impact on heaven. It's not, God is not oblivious to it. And Chassidus will explain, like we're explaining here, that the effect is on Malchus of Atzilus, not higher. But it does have an effect. It's like when we say, it says, for example, kaloni, when a person is hurt below, it says that God says, I am hurt above. Or the concept of shchinta begalusa. So we say, Golu le'edem shchine imohem. Parsha Nitzavim, actually, in this week's Parsha, there was past week's Parsha, we read that as well. The idea that Hashem is together with us in Golus. What does that mean? We say, Ani Hashem Leishan Isi, and for sure God is not in Golus. And yet you say that God weeps with us. He's with us in our tzaras, in our problems. So this is a big, big discussion in Chassidus. We learned about it as well. When it says Erdana, when Hashem sees the pain, the cries coming from Sodom, the wicked city of Sodom, it says Erdana, let us descend below and see where these cries are coming from. So a big question is asked. It's a big question that the Alter Rebbe and Tereir, and I mean a lot of Kabbalah and Chassidus is based on this. Where is God descending from, and where is He going down to? He doesn't know that people are crying. He needs to come down. The same idea of Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. God descends on Mount Sinai. And where was He before exactly? Don't we say Eineid Movade? God Malay Kol Aretz Kved. He's everywhere. So descent is explained there, not a physical descent. It means that God added another level of divine consciousness, that He doesn't experience us from without, but He experiences us from within. In other words, you could have God could have said, "I see everything." Of course, like we may have learned, you may recall learning about God, your dualoi. Everything is known to God, but known, you could also be on top of a mountain and have a bird's eye view and also know things. Yedeya means I know it because I'm with you. I'm in it with you. It's not the same experience. So you could say that God is beyond it all and remains removed. But the answer is no, no. Hashem said, I want to also be among you. So the Erdana is referring to Atzilus, where there's the 10 spheres, and there's the levels of Elikus that go on after the Tzimtzum, and the 10 spheres where Slapshus, Eres, Bekalim. But we know God is beyond Eres, Bekalim, and God is beyond Chochmah, Bina, Das. And beyond all of that, that's the higher than the Erdana. But then there's how God manifests among us. Similar to when Moshe Rabbeinu saw God saw the divine revelation in the sneh, in the thorn bush. What was that? So it says in the Medrash, and Chassidus explains, because God wanted to show him, I'm with you in the pain, in the thorn bush. I'm not just looking from heaven at the pains of people, human beings below. I'm in it with them to a certain extent. So going back to what we're learning here, this is the essential theme here, that there's that machtule chosed alav, that there's a chosed alav, that even lamaila, there's something chosed. When there's pain below, when there's a sin below, it causes kemachel bebasar achai, like the pain, like a needle of bebasar achai, just like we feel pain when an animal has a needle that's annoying it, it feels it. So he says, u'kamaymer deichik ragle hashchina, that when you do a sin, you deichik ragle hashchina. Deichik ragle hashchina means you undermine, you undercut the raglim of the shchina. It's like somebody walking and somebody makes you slip, somebody makes you fall. So how could you say ragle hashchina? But there's an expression like that, deichik ragle hashchina, kavyachal, so to speak. Ukiyadua, as it's known, shal yedei ha'avenis nasa p'gomim l'mayla. Through transgressions, it causes injuries, it causes wounds above. Yes, it causes wounds above. P'gam l'mayla. Shazeu b'bchinas evarim d'shchinta. This is where the shchina already manifests in evarim. Kavyachal again. Obviously, atzmus and godliness and the highest levels are beyond evarim, limbs, but then there's a level we learned about evarim d'shchinta. Remember the Ramach evarim, the mitzvahs connect to that, and the same thing with the averis, shasa, loisasa, and when you don't do a mitzvah or when you do something wrong, you're affecting, so to speak, the divine organism, the divine the divine structure. It's not human, but we're created in the divine image, so there is some parallel there. Hashem, Ozne Hashem. We have the expression, the eyes of God, the ears of God. We know God doesn't have eyes or ears, so why are we using that expression? So of course, Torah is speaking in the language of math, but it's more than that. It's because godliness manifests in the human structure, in a structure that's similar to what the human is like, and there is an impact of our behavior. And what are these referring to? The eyes of God, the ears of God. We learned this earlier. Shehein malochim shenikraim evrei d'shchinta. These are the angels that are called the limbs of the Shechina. So the Shechina obviously is the Shechina. There's the limbs of the Shechina, the extension of them, just like the limbs of a body. As was discussed earlier, if you remember, that angels have all kinds of, there's the kirbayim, the angels are like the innards, the gut. There's the angels that are like the eyes, the ears. He gave all kinds of examples, that these are all so-called godliness manifesting itself in a structure called the Adam Elyon. The Adam Elyon has limbs, and these limbs are where this dimensions is where the divine is engaging with existence. So you have the interface. You have something that's in common. Generally, it's the 10 spheres. That's something in common. God's 10 attributes correspond, from there evolve our 10 faculties. But in a broader scale is the Evarim, the Shechinta, where there you could say Dechek Ragli Hashchina and all these effects. The Ha'aras HaMalchus, the reflection of Malchus of Atzilus, Sha'ideh Parsa, Sheben Atzilus Biy'a. Through the Parsa, remember it's coming after the partition that conceals, and it's a paradigm shift from the divine of Atzilus as it goes into Biy'a. There's this powerful partition, Mislabeshes Behem. That the heart of Malchus through the Parsa between Atzilus, Mislabeshes Behem, in what? In the Evarim of the Shechina, which are the Malachim, the Einei Hashem, the Oznei Hashem, the details that we're talking about. So it all starts from Malchus. Malchus of Atzilus is beyond this, but then Malchus of Atzilus manifests and travels through the partition, the curtain, which is like a tzimtzum, a tremendous tzimtzum, And that, through that, shines into Biy'a, Biy'a, which is the Evarim of the Shechina, the Malachim, and everything we just described. The Hain. And this level, these are the Koaches Elikim Mumutsayim. These are the divine faculties that are like interfaces. Lahamshich Hashefa Ma'elam La'elam. To transmit the flow from world to world. Remember, we learned about angels being the gut, the digestive system, to process, just like a digestive system processes the food intake and separates the nutrients from the waste and breaks it down, and each part of the body gets its particular needs and its nutrients to sustain it. So Lamaila, that's what the Seder Shtalshus, what we call the cosmic digestive system, the cosmic order that creates the possibility, the Mamutsayim, that these are the structures, the divine structures put in place that allow the flow to flow properly from world to world, that there should remain an intact structure. If you didn't have all these tzimtzumim and the Parsa, the divine energy would overwhelm everything, would be like a tsunami. The ocean of the divine ocean would just fill all of existence and there cease to be distinction. Exactly what the tzimtzum did after the Eir Ein Sof. Eir Ein Sof filled all of existence. Nothing could exist. So you need to have a withdrawal, a concealment, receding energy to allow space. The same thing on a microcosmic level is where Malchus the Atzilus does the same thing between Atzilus and Biy'a, creating this structure. And in this structure, there is an engagement between the divine and existence, and there is a shinui and ispilus. And again, I point out to you that most of this is the actual Mittler Rebbe's language. You can even tell if you can discern the signet, the style of the Rebbe Rashab and the Mittler Rebbe. With one addition, the Eine Hashem, Oznei Hashem line, the Rebbe Rashab added. But the rest is word for word from the Mittler Rebbe. And this is the level of the outer containers. There are mid containers, there are kelim premium. But the outer containers is mostly where this is happening, the outer expression of it all, where the koach hapel benifel, where the divine energy is manifesting within existence. Okay. But this is the divine within existence. From here on, the next, not here, the Avol, the next lines, I'm going to stop here, I believe. I just want to see if I should read a few lines because okay. The next section is going to talk about what, but then there's a level that's higher. I will read 2 lines more. Avol, Mesita de Shechina, Omar Kiloide Isim Kol Tmuna de Adam. From the perspective, Mesitra de Shechina, Sitra means like Sitra de Gdusha, the Sitra Achra, the other side, Sitra de Shechina, from the perspective of the Shechina, this is from the perspective from below. So we see a varim, we see a structure, we see eyes, ears, metaphorically speaking. But from the perspective of the Shechina, Omar, Kiloide Isam Kol Tmuna de Adam. They did not see any tmuna, the Adam, any image, any likeness of human. We just said that he manifests in the likeness of the human being. Like we say, B'tzelem Elikim, B'tzelem B'dmus, and so on. So he says, V'hainu b'chinas Malchus d'Atzilus, k'moshi b'Atzilus torem shemis labeshes b'Biy'a. So just like we spoke about the nefesh before, there's the nefesh as it manifests in the body, and there it experiences the pains and the pleasure of the body. Like here, the level of the Shechina that experiences the pagam, the pain and the wounds due to sins, due to transgressions. But then there's Malchus before it comes down into Biy'a, how it is in Atzilus, and that's where the Shechina is saying that I don't recognize the Tmun is beyond the structure. Top of page 1470. Even though that Malchus is the root and source of Biy'a that will go into Sheba Atzilus, the Biy'a of Atzilus, with Biy'a within Atzilus, which will then ultimately become Biy'a, because Malchus is the Koach Hagili of Atzilus. Like we said before, the Neshama has the Koach Hagili. That was the Gashmi Sheberuchnis, the Biy'a within Atzilus. U'kamoshin is bar le'el b'b'chinas hamalchus shebechol sfira. like we learned earlier, that the Malchus in every sphere, who Koach HaGilui shel HaSphira, that's the power of revelation in every sphere. And the same is true of V'cheinu b'Malchus b'chlal, and the same as Malchus in general is Gilui. Hine, nevertheless, Hine b'chinas Koach HaGilui k'moishi b'Atzilus sham ein shum shini v'yispailas klal. Nevertheless, the Koach HaGilui, the way it's in Atzilus, there's no change and no effect at all. So it's only an effect when the neshama, when the Elokus comes in after the Parsa into Biy'a. As long as it remains only a power of Gilui, even though it's the root of the divine that will manifest within existence, it still remains above and beyond Shina and Ispilus. So there you have both dimensions in Elokus. Elokus, that's Koach HaPoel B'nifl, the Ha'ara, where there is a Shina and Ispilus, where there is change and effect, and a level of Elokus that's as it is in Atzilus, where it's beyond Shina and Ispilus. So now we understand where the whole example with the nefesh, the soul and the body, the same is true. There's the soul as it engages with the body, and there's the soul that remains above it and is not affected by it. So both elements are true. Obviously, there's more to say and more to discuss, but I'll stop here by the period, fourth line on page 1470, and we'll take any questions.
Rabbi
As I
Jacob,
see, as I see, he continues. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
you remember, like a little bit before, we were talking about Abraham, and it says that originally his neshama was the Atzilus, the manifestation in Biy'a, but then after the Akedah, he was able to catapult to the Chesed of the Olam Atzilut. So now we're talking the fact that the only effect is on the Malchut level. So how is it possible that he went all the way to the Chesed of Atzilus?
Why is it not? Through Avodah, we can reach even all the way up to Atzmus. We're talking about the natural structures of things, the way they were created. Through the Avodah of a person, you can reach very high levels. Where does it say here you can't reach high levels?
No, I just thought that the effect, like if we do anything on Avodah, the
Effect
highest
and
level with effect
reaching a high level and effect is not necessarily synonymous.
Got it.
In addition, as we have learned and we will learn, that even though our effect is like on the potter's wheel, what we called before the tikla is on Malchus, but once that door of Malchus opens up, the hamshachas from Azah and Bina and Chachma and higher come flowing through. So even though it doesn't impact it, but the fact that it impacts a lower level that opens up the doors, it's like, for example, we want to reach the king, but the doors are closed. If you can open the door, and there is a shina in the spilus, because you're getting the door open. Once the door is open, then you have access to higher levels, even though there may not be direct impact on those higher levels, but the doors are open, so they flow easily. So sometimes it's about getting the arteries unclogged or unblocked, and then the flow comes flowing from the highest levels. We learned this earlier. We will learn more of it soon, and next page especially. But that's part of this discussion, yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question to clarify the first sentence we learned today versus the last part we just learned. So on the one hand, he's saying that when there's a sin, there's that avonos nesa pagamim l'mayla, and he went on to explain. It seems that he's talking about, well, that's one. At the end, he says there is no change in Malchus, and both of those situations, he's talking about Malchus of Atzilus. So to reconcile that, is he saying on the one hand, when we sin, just as we cut ourselves off, if you will, Rahman and Latzma, that from our connection with the Eberster, so too when we sin, we disrupt the flow of Elokus from above to below. It's not that we're changing Elokus; it doesn't want to be around us when we behave that way. So that's the issue of the flow. On the other hand, we're not changing, we're not causing any effect in Elokus. We may be, I don't know, sort of driving it away. It doesn't want to be around us, but we're not changing its intrinsic nature. Is that a fair reconciliation?
No, it's not. It's not what he's saying at all, actually.
Okay, wonderful.
I mean, it's fine that you could think that way, but it's not what he's saying here at all. He's saying there are two levels in Elikus, just like there are two levels in the Nefesh and the Guf. There's Elikus that comes, Malchus Atzilus, like he says, that comes into Biy'a, Koach HaPoel Benifel. Like I mentioned, Erdana, he descends and engages and feels the pain. However you explain how he feels it, but he's affected by it. That's Malchus of Atzilus after the Parsa in Biy'a. And then there's Malchus of Atzilus as it's before the Parsa, before this Tzimtzum. And there's no Shechina Hispaila. Similar to what he said before about the Nefesh, there's the Nefesh as it manifests the Gashmis Shabaruchnius into the Ruchni Shabagashmis. And there it feels the pain and pleasure of the body. While at the same time he said, Mukhrachim Lemed, the Shnei Memes, that there's also a level of the Neshama that does not feel and is beyond it all. So there's two separate things. The idea that he cannot be there and flow, that is not necessarily a Shechina in his pilus. That's just simply the higher level is not there. But we're talking about the levels that are there. There's a divine element, like I said, Shechina is begolus. That's not removed. It's not like we went into Golus and Hashem left. He's also with us in Golus. That this dimension that is. That's what he's saying here.
I see. Thank you.
Sometimes the expression, for example, by Shviras HaKelim is that the lower levels, there was the actual Shvira, the actual shattering. In the higher levels, there's more histalkus. You're touching upon that a bit, which is relevant not so much to what we're learning here, but in overall, there are levels where there is a pagam lamaila. That's obviously the worst. The actual pain, the actual pagam. Again, how to explain it is another discussion, but there is a pagam lamaila. Then there's a level, it's not a pagam, it's more like just like an injury to the body is going to be a part that there's an actual injury. But there's also the energy that was there before the injury that will withdraw and recede back into the spirit that you need now through healing. You need to bring that energy back. So there's two things happening. That is correct in what you said. There is an element that is so-called leaves when there's a chet, but then there's an element that is affected by the chet. That's just two different dimensions.
Thank you.
So it's not incorrect what you're saying as far as conceptual, but what he's saying here is actually saying far more that there is actually a level, there is a pagam, and that's the dogma of the nefesh and the guf. I don't, yeah. Okay.
Understood. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah.
This level of the level of Malchus that there's no Shinoi or Spalos. That's not the level of Lo Ani Hashem Lo Shanisi, right? That's Malchus of Atzilus that doesn't come down.
It is because if you remember earlier, he said Ani Hashem Havaya, the Hey Achrena of Havaya is Malchus.
I always thought that level. I see.
You go back to 4 lines before the end of 5 lines before the end of the paragraph on page 1468. You'll see Shem Havaya Ha'erva Gilim Min Ha'etzem. You see?
Yes. But the level we talk about,
well, obviously higher than Malchus for sure.
So when we talk about in the Chassidus, when we talk about the Pintel Yid, we're talking about Malchus of Atzilus?
I don't know, unless it says that. Not necessarily. It could be higher. The Pintel Yid could be Chelik Elikam Mal Mamash. I mean, I don't know if I ever saw where if they give it a particular geographical location. It could be relative to Malchus and Biy'a. You could say Malchus of Atzilus, like the Pintel Yid, if you wish. But I would my intuition tells me it's probably higher than that. But remember, Malchus of Atzilus is rooted in Keser, and also rooted in very high levels as well.
But it's far, far away from Etzem.
How many miles?
93 million.
I thought the Pintel Yid was the Tachton Shalabore. It went very high.
Actually, only 1,800 miles to the core of the earth.
In that context, yeah, when you say Tachton Shalabore, like Yechida and Yachid, correct? We learned earlier it's all the way up and before the Tzimtzum, and I'm saying, relatively speaking, everything's relative. You could say that relative to Malchus. Anyway, it's as I said, I don't know if that's I would define the Pintel Yid there. More accurate would be what Yitzchak just said, is the Tachtein Shebebeira, which goes back, I don't know what page that is, a long while back. Spoke about Yechida and Yachid.
I think it's around 1408. I'm not sure.
The Nitzutz cotton. Yeah. But I'm just saying, Malchus of Atzilus before the Parsa, relatively speaking, has an element of that. But anyway, it's not. Basically, the concept of Afal Pisha Chota Yisrael Hu, that even though he sinned, he's still Yisrael, is definitely talking about the levels that remain intact even when there's a chet, which is higher than the levels that don't remain intact, the pagam, that need to be corrected. When Moshe begged forgiveness and gained forgiveness at Yom Kippur, he was able to reach into the etzem, but we still have to contend with the pagam that was done. The Avodah Zarah, the idolatry of the golden calf, created a tremendous pagam. It's like, let's say there's an infidelity in a marriage, God forbid. Even if you're able to get reconciliation, because the love of husband and wife is so deep, but that's not suggesting there was no injury. And that's suggesting that has to be worked on. It's not like we just, okay, forgive and forget. Sometimes you have to really work on also the pagam level. So one is not a contradiction to the next. You need both. You want to be able to reach deeper, but you can't ignore somebody hurt you, someone really hurt you. You could say, you know what, I forgive you and I love you anyway, and we have such a deep love. But there was hurt done. That's why we have to ask mechila, forgiveness, and we have to grant mechila. And that we know is a soul-searching effort. It's not always that easy to grant or to ask for forgiveness. I'm talking about where it really requires it. But it's not just enough to say, hey, we're both one etzem echad, and let's forget it all, nothing happened. That usually is insulting. It means like you're ignoring the actual injury that was done. I'm not talking about being petty and being superficial. We're talking about where there's a serious injury that needs to be addressed. And especially a person could say, okay, let's forget it all. And then tomorrow they do the same thing again. So it clearly tells you it's not just enough to go to the etzem. You need to also work on the relationship to make sure that you really improve you don't do the same thing again. That's what's true. The people who, for example, call before Yom Kippur and ask forgiveness. And then the person tells them, hey, you know what? Every year you do the same thing to me, you hurt me, and then you call me Erev Yom Kippur for forgiveness. Why don't you stop hurting me? You don't have to call me. But you have the same vicious cycle. You hurt, you ask for forgiveness to resolve, to alleviate your own guilt, and then you do it again, which of course is like a joke,
So the Atzilus of every neshama, every person's neshama is always pristine. It's never except the lowest level of Malchus of that of Atzilus.
In general terms, correct. In general terms, but when you start learning deeper, you'll find Atzilus there could also be relative to higher than Atzilus. You won't call it a pagam. You may not call it shinui spilas, but you can call also some. It's all relative when you're talking to shtalshlus, because at the end of the day, Atzilus is after the tzimtzum. So the shinui spilas is a relative thing as well. He hasn't addressed that so much. Just mentioning it just because you may find somewhere where you see that Atzilus, that Erdana is into Atzilus sometimes, it says, not into Biy'a necessarily. But it's another discussion, not for here right now. But for all practical purposes, yes, Shinei Spilas is Malchus in Biy'a after the Parsa. Above that, he says clearly, Ein Shinei Spilas Klal. We discussed this also back, if you go back to page 1428, 1429, which he's going to refer to soon again. We discussed it more at length because that's where he talked about a lot about Shinui and Espilus, Malchus higher than Malchus. So I would definitely, if you want to do a little homework and connect, go back to page 1228, especially 1227 and on. 1227 through 12, well, a good 5-6 pages at least. Yeah. Good. Okay. So we stop here. Hop on page 1470. Good. Hey. We'll have to get back about machtuli. Okay, machtuli, machatuli, machatuli. I'll